see yourself.
Right, and so you hear yourself, kind of
Right,
after you say it.
right,
It's just
right.
not the best.
All right, we are good to go.
We're good to go. Good. Well, tell me who you are and what your rank was.
Yeah, my name is Leo Geoff, and I served for 30 years in the Navy. I was a submarine captain. I had command of a nuclear submarine and spent about 10 years in the Pentagon.
And so why is clean energy a national security issue?
I look at national security from three perspectives. One, you have to have a strong government. And by strong, I don't necessarily mean big, but you have to have a government that has a vision and can act on that vision. The second part of national security, in my mind, is economy. You have to have a strong and robust economy. If you don't, you can't serve the will of your people, and you can't provide the goods and services they need. And most importantly, and the third element, is you have to have a strong and capable military. Again, that goes hand in hand with the economy. If you don't have a strong economy, you're probably not going to have a strong military. So you have to have the military there as part of national security to protect your interests and the nation's interests.
And how is clean energy related to that?
Yeah, so that's the follow-on part of that. A couple of elements, and we can begin at the beginning with the economy. So from an economic point of view, I was a submarine captain for 20 years, and I served my tour during the height of the Cold War. So I chased Soviet submarines for a good portion of my career. And when Ronald Reagan became president in the early 80s, he saw our military and said, hey, you're not where we need to be. So he invested a huge amount of money in the military, building its capability and capacity, high tech, high performance. And at that time, the Soviets, we were, peer competitors, the largest superpowers in the world. The Soviets tried to keep up with us, and they were not able to. So the Soviet Union went away, and it was an economic perspective that they went away. So the economy is important. And when you look at Russia today, Russia is rebuilding, and they're rebuilding on petrodollars. So it goes back to the national security, right? So it's the military, it's the economy, and energy is a vital part of the economy. You look no farther than Russia and the petrodollars, but you can also see the same thing in ISIS. Clearly we know that ISIS funded most of their capability and capacity through selling oil in the black market. The same thing's happening with Iran. Now that sanctions are over on Iran, you can expect to see that country really get a stronger hold in the Middle East, and that's a critical interest for our national security. So it's all linked: economy, national security, our government policies. And so when it comes to a clean energy, we have to be able to have our alternatives for that oil. Most people know that the Middle East is ripe with oil, and so for many years they have had a stranglehold on us with respect to our policy in that area, and has really shaped our policy. Recently, we've been able to expand our oil portfolio in the United States, but it's a very expensive proposition in the United States. So we are still subject to having oil and the prices associated with oil. So if we're able to embrace an alternative to fuel, we can we can cut those ties, and we can choose our own destiny, more appropriately choose our own destiny in who we want to be friends with, who we don't want to be friends with around the world.
This is great, Leo. So what things have been changing so rapidly in the last 2 years or so. I mean, it's been building, but
Right.
now we seem to be cascading. Can you talk a little bit about, like you talked about last night, this transformation?
Yeah, so it's really an exciting time. I think that we are witnessing the precipice of a revolution in energy, and I say that from a personal perspective. But all my readings and everything, you see it through history. We have not been dependent upon oil and fossil fuels for very long. It's only been about 110 years. And I look at what's happened in the Navy. I'll go back to my perspective in the Navy. So up through the mid-1800s, the Navy had sailing ships, and that's the only thing that we had. Of course, it was a good form of renewable energy, but they were limited in what they could do then because it only has so much energy, and we couldn't store that energy. Whatever slipped out of the sails was lost. We didn't have any technology to store that energy. So early in the 1800s, this French guy, Fulton, decided, hey, it wouldn't be great to put steam onboard ships and build the fire onboard ships. A lot of people thought he was crazy, and it's called the Fulton Folly. But that matured itself through the 1800s, and by about the mid or the later part of the 1800s, the Navy said this is a really good idea. And at the same time, we were also starting to build our ships out of steel. Took a lot more energy to move those things through the water. So we needed something other than the wind to move our ships through the water. So we put coal-fired engines on board the ships. But that didn't last long because the technology advanced. And by the early 1900s, coal was being replaced by oil. So that by 1925, all of our ships were being replaced from coal to oil. And even that didn't last long because by the mid-1900s, 1959, we started to embrace a new technology called nuclear power. We started to put nuclear power on board of our ships. Currently, of the 290 some odd ships that we have in the Navy, fully 1/3 of them are nuclear powered. All of our submarines and all of our aircraft carriers. So the point being is that the way we use energy has always been in flux. Again, we've only used fossil fuels for the last 100 years. And when you look at the technology that's being developed now with electricity, driven around electricity, and that's electricity generated through wind, through solar, through nuclear power. We have the ability to generate hydrogen and burn hydrogen in fuel cells. So we're becoming so smart on understanding the chemistry of these things and how everything's put together that we're now ready to release all that energy in its smallest forms. As I was talking about last night, I think that the real key is the battery and storage in general. Because, and if you look at the battery itself, it's like any other technology. It's got a technology development curve that over time, it's going to decrease in cost and it's going to increase in performance. And you can just plot that out over the last 10 or 12 years and project out the graph linearly, and about early 20s, the batteries that we have and the thing that there will be used most prevalently first will be in electric vehicles. Those batteries can be sized in about the early 20s they will replace the performance and really a lot of the mileage that our current vehicles have. So I think that early 20s, certainly by the late 20s and early 30s, you'll be hard pressed to find an internal combustion engine for sale. There'll be some, but they'll be niche. The vast majority of the fleets that'll be sold in the 20s and 30s will be electric vehicles. And I'll tell you, the countries that are going to do that first are the developing nations. China, India. They're not going to build a fleet of internal combustion engines. As soon as these things get cost parity, which will be in the 20s, not more than 7 years or so, they're going to leapfrog, and that's all they're going to buy because they're going to be better. The performance on those things, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at some of the videos out there that have already done it, but all over YouTube where Tesla cars or other electric vehicles, they've got such a high torque. I mean, it's instantaneous torque. You just flip the switch and push a button, and they can beat a Corvette, they can beat a Ferrari in a quarter mile, and people are going to want to buy that. You know, they'll spend a premium for that, but they won't have to because it's going to be the cost of a normal sedan. So it's exciting times.
It's very exciting. Why is it, and I just loved, I mean, it was infectious last night, Leo, when you were talking about this, because I was like, oh my God, Leo is just really got, he's on it. Why is it important for America to lead in this from a national security position?
Yeah, I think that it's most important for us to be in a leadership role because we want to be able to have some influence. I mean, we want to be able to have some influence of the technology, so we don't want a technology that produces bad stuff. You know, we already have one of those. It's called fossil fuels. We didn't know that when we were first starting it. So, you know, if we can identify whether it's carcinogens or pollutants or, you know, there's a whole life cycle path that you've got to look at. What do you do when you dispose these things? I mean, if we make the best batteries, but we can't dispose them because they leak acid everywhere or they, you know, put toxins in the water stream, that would not be a good thing. So it's been my experience, my observation, that the United States is probably more sensitive to that than others around the world. And if we are the leader in there, we can help shape that. So that's one end of the spectrum, is that we can help develop the technology that will be safe, be effective, meet our standards, and we can spread that around the globe. That is a good thing. But more importantly, I think it's about influence. If we seed, you have to ask yourself, so that's the good thing if we lead, but what happens if we don't lead? So if we don't lead, we seed influence. So whomever it is that develops the best technology and produces that technology for the rest of the world is beholding to that person that developed the technology. They can do a refresh rate every year, like we have now, where you have to come back to that same buyer if you want that same product, or they can just put enough of their own intellectual property in it that they really own that piece of equipment, whether it's through maintenance or whatever. So, from my perspective, that's one of the biggest challenges of why we want to be out in front of this. There's a whole economic, there's a potential for it to be a real boom for the country to begin with, if we embrace this and we let the free market run with this thing. And again, from a national security point of view, the economy is very important, so don't discount that. But for me, the biggest important is influence, and we don't want to lose global influence, especially when it comes to something as important as energy. We've already seen that. The Middle East did that. The Middle East owns oil. We've got some, Russia's got some, but the Middle East has the greatest amount of oil, so they influence politics. We don't want the next energy source to be controlled by somebody of that same ilk, wherever it is in the world. So hopefully we've learned a lesson from that.
It's so funny when you just jumped into that. I was about to say, so we don't want to replace the Middle East with China.
Exactly. Yeah. China or India or Indonesia or whomever invents, or France. France is working on a fusion reactor, about the only ones. We're working on some, but Europe is really making some great strides in fusion. They may come out with that soon, and although we have strong enough linkages that we won't be in that same degree of consternation. Europe's not always been our friend, parts of it. So better to have it here and not have to worry about that. Is my perspective.
Great. This is terrific, Leo. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's easy. Easy questions.
Yeah.